This week on the Eldritch Lorecast, Heroes of the Borderlands.
Is there a dragon?
Spoilers, there's a dragon.
Is there a dragon in the box set?
How to differentiate evil gods.
Most players don't care the difference between a god and a demon lord.
Jesus? The Jesus guy. That guy.
Should you help your players
Witcher watch, watching the witches.
as our expert panels of freelancers and TTRPG writers?
And also Dael.
All that and more right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms. That's right, down in the Underdark, all the drow listen to the Eldritch Lorecast whilst they do their scheming, going, how will we get up there and harness the power of the Eldritch Lorecast for ourselves? If you're still listening, my name's Ben Byrne, and I am joined, as always, by Shawn Merwin, James Haig, Dael Kingsmill. Do you have like a go-to starter adventure that you run that is the thing you know is good for getting new players into the game? Could be D&D, could be a different game if you prefer. But like this is how to play an RPG, this is the adventure I'm going to run.
The how to play an RPG adventure.
Sure.
I have said before on the Lorecast that I'm a big fan of the Pathfinder beginner box, and I stand by that. I also really like there's a Pathfinder adventure called Hollow's Last Hope that I altered quite a bit that I like to use, and that's the adventure I use to introduce my family members to D&D. And then there's also one that I cobbled together myself that is just follows the same basic principles, which I think is you gotta have a riddle, you gotta have a trap of some kind,
Sure.
You gotta fight some kind of little creature. Goblins, kobolds, what have you. And there's got to be a dragon at some point.
Okay, all right. I might have just the thing as well for that. But first, speaking of introducing new players to Dungeons & Dragons, James Haig, is that where you are? Are you introducing new people this weekend?
Yes. So I'm coming to you live from beautiful Burbank, California today. Just coming back from Dungeons and Cabins, which is a D&D in a castle-like event that takes place in the mountains of San Bernardino, just outside of Los Angeles, California, where I would say most of the people there were at least somewhat veteran RPG players, but there were at least 5 players who had never played more than a session or two of D&D in their life out of all 36 campers that we had this weekend. And it's funny you bring up starter adventures, because I was riding home back to the library where I'm podcasting to you from right now, with fellow DNC Dungeon Master Leon Barrilero, a frequent MCDM contributor and good friend of mine. And we were talking about the Workshop Watches, an adventure that they wrote for Arcadia issue 1 back in the day, in which the player characters encounter something akin to a sapient artificial intelligence that is building itself the body out of the chassis of a shield guardian. And a shield guardian, typically a monster you can imbue in a spell into, so it can cast it later. Well, this clever AI has learned how to perfectly recreate any spell it observes in any way. And so this adventure, which takes a little bit from like the Ray Bradbury story, the Smart House, I think, the Living House, something like that, and Portal, the great Valve puzzle game, involves you going through this somewhat test chambery arcane laboratory while shepherding this naive and rapidly learning and potentially very dangerous artificial being called Sam. This is a great adventure for new players because it leans very heavily on sort of the decision making and agency that D&D requires, while not having any very arduously mechanically involved things. But it also involves all the spells the players have access to. So they're thinking about their characters and their characters' abilities and how those have direct consequences on the world of the game. I was reminded of that adventure just this afternoon, and so I wanted to shout it out.
Probably the one I've run most is one called Defiance and Flan, which I wrote for the Adventurers League at the start of 5th edition. It's a 5-session, 5-hour adventure, so 1 hour per session. And the first one is you play adventures, obviously, but they ask you to go to a buy where someone is trying to buy an illegal item, which is a dragon egg. So you have to pretend to be a merchant who is trying to buy this dragon egg. So you are sort of, even if you've never played, you know what it's like to pretend. So you have to pretend to be these merchants and their bodyguards and their associates or what have you. So it gets to that role play part right away by saying, don't worry about your character right now. Just pretend you are someone else. And then later you can pretend to be your own character as well.
Gotcha. I've used that multiple times to start entire campaigns as the kind of like you, at one point it was a tavern owner was one of the characters who had to deliver the dragon egg, and that ended up with their tavern getting burned down a few sessions later because they tangled with the underworld. At another point when I was running it in Grimhollow, it was like a vampire's hand in a box that they had to deliver instead, as kind of a magic MacGuffin. So yeah, that's great. That's a great little like first. It's a good little setup for the impetus of a larger story, you know, like where did this MacGuffin come from? Who are the people trying to get it? What's your involvement, et cetera, et cetera. I also wanted to shout out the one that I use a lot. I've used Lost Mines of Foundelva if I'm starting like a campaign, but if I am just doing like a one shot at a convention or something like that, I've used Trouble Under Winton, which was written by Micah Watt, and it's on Drive-Thru RPG at the moment. And I think it's a good one because it's basically like a windmill collapses into a hill. So it starts with a bit of a mystery, and then you go down into the hill and you fight some kobolds. There are traps. There are kind of puzzly elements. And then what I like about it is at the end, it is much more combat focused. There's a lot of kobolds in a very large room. And if you try to just run in there and take them all on at once, you're probably going to get overwhelmed as a group because it's a low-level adventure. But if you kind of strategize it out a little bit, and this is what I like about it, is it forces critical thinking on the party and for them to go, okay, how are we going to kind of isolate these pockets of enemies and take them out one by one to accomplish our goal, which I enjoy. It introduces like kind of the strategic elements of combat, and it's got a dragon in it as well.
It ticks all the boxes.
All the boxes.
It ticks all the boxes.
You might say it has a dungeon and a dragon. Yeah. There we go. Speaking of starter adventures, Wizards of the Coast are days away. I actually didn't take down the release date, but they're days away from release. I think it's the 16th of September, which is today in Australia time. Anyway, they're hours away perhaps from releasing Heroes of the Borderlands.
And when this releases on YouTube and other sort of post-record locations, it will be the past.
Yes, post-record locations. I've been looking at some early reviews for this, which have had kind of a similar theme. We've talked a lot in this episode, so we won't, or on this podcast, so we won't rehash them all, but the copious amounts of components in this box that make it feel almost more like a board game than necessarily a role-playing game, at least from the number of components, and really tactilely introducing players to the game of D&D. But the two reviews I read, one was Christian Hoffer on EN World, the other was Samantha Nelson on Polygon, were kind of saying that the intro for the players is really strong. But the kind of adventures themselves are a little bit disconnected, discombobulated. They run fine as like little go here and do this, but there's nothing that really excites the players or pushes the players to explore different areas to create kind of an overarching narrative. I don't know if I'm explaining myself very well. I don't know if anybody here has had a chance to look at it or, I don't know, speak to someone who was maybe closely associated with the design team that worked on this.
Shawn? Well, now that you mention it, Ben, on the not number one podcast in all the realms, recorded just today, two very intrepid young game designers and podcasters interviewed Justice Arman. And we talked all about the new starter set. I think you can't serve every master with every product.
Sure.
And I think what should be exciting for people with this new starter set is that you are playing D&D and you are learning about your character and you are learning the rules and you are learning those things. And I don't think you want a deep, convoluted story at that point. There is a power in simplicity that we sometimes forget about as we get more advanced in our own gaming. So there's nothing wrong with putting a goal in front of a player, having the players do that goal, and then have the next goal. The box set here, this starter set also wants to encourage other people to DM. And you can't do that if you have this long plot with all these twists and turns, because if you hand the book over to the next DM, they're reading about everything. So you want it in these bite-sized chunks that any game master can pick up, run, and then switch the game master midstream if you need to.
Yeah, I guess that makes a lot of sense. This also reminded me a lot of like 80s, 90s role-playing games, and I mean in a video game context. A couple of years ago when Bethesda released Fallout 4, it was great. It was a cool RPG, but the real best RPG they released that year was like Grog something the Barbarian, which was like a phone mobile RPG that was super simple, where you just roamed around and got stronger for fighting monsters. And I was like, this is great. This is really fun. This is really simple. And it feels like that's kind of what they might be going for in terms of like just enjoying the game, enjoying the mechanics of the game rather than the sweeping story arcs of more modern RPGs, both in video games and role-playing games.
One of my things that I talked about today will probably tie back into what I've been doing this weekend, which is playing in a very large game with a lot of players and multiple DMs back at camp. I designed a lot of the encounters along with the event organizer, Sammy Glicker, but it ended in there was a twisty, mysterious kind of suspicion-inducing plot in a lot of ways. But in order to make the adventure easily digestible by all 6 DMs that needed to run it, we somehow needed to communicate a lot of potential for complexity in very simple terms. Otherwise, it would be really hard to digest and internalize. And what we wound up doing is we wound up saying, hey, just talk to each other, DMs, right? Talk to each other. And as you develop these beats of complexity and suspicion and like social intrigue, just keep open lines of communication. We won't mandate a lot of stuff that goes on. And that sort of, socially induced complexity rather than textual complexity requires more communication and more legwork on the day, but it makes for a simpler preparation experience. And I think that even DMs who are just playing this box set will experience that, where the complexity of the story is something that the players in their interactions will generate.
Is there a dragon?
Spoilers, there's a dragon.
Yeah. Spoiler
Good.
Is there a box set? Is there a dragon in the box set?
Yeah.
And that's all we need.
I just loved the unimpressed expression on Dael's face when she asked that.
I know what I'm about, Ben.
Yeah, fair enough.
That all sounds great, but if there ain't no dragon...
then Dael's not buying it, figuratively or literally.
Yeah.
Do you find, like, let's take ourselves back, Dael, like 10 years, however long it's been since you've started playing RPGs, or even 5e specifically. Does this appeal to you as someone who would be like, oh, I'm interested in running this game, or I'm interested in playing in this game? Does this specific setup work for you?
It's hard to tell without seeing it for myself.
Sure.
I definitely have been interested in the past in board games that kind of train you in the sort of mechanics that a TTRPG uses, and then kind of lead you to a place where you could like plop out at the end into a TTRPG game.
Sure.
So, I think there's a lot of promise in the premise. See what I did? That was a little bit of wordplay for you there. It's hard to sort of get a grip on how I would feel about it without seeing it for myself properly. But I suppose if it has traps, and it has puzzles, and it has little guys to fight, and it has a dragon, and also a little bit of roleplay, which I didn't mention earlier, but there should be a little bit of roleplay. They're great. It ticks all the boxes. So, even if I didn't personally like it, I would be forced to give it an A grade.
I know these two things are not mutually exclusive necessarily, but I am kind of curious because, Shawn, you talked before about the dragon egg kind of smuggle adventure that you wrote, that the intention was for the players to not worry about their characters so much in the immediacy of right now and kind of just focus on pretending to be somebody else, practicing the muscle, if you will, of role-playing. And when you're introducing people to RPGs, and this is an open question for everyone, do you prefer in the first few moments, the first encounter, whatever it is, to focus on teaching them the game or the role-playing kind of muscle, if you will?
There's not one I prefer to start with, but I prefer to keep whatever instance of thing you're doing short, so you can quickly go back and forth between the two. One should lead to the other. So the play should lead to the teaching, which should lead to the next step of play, which should lead to the next step of the teaching. This might be a little off the question you just asked, but a dilemma that we've probably talked about here, and we often talk about when we teach games, is: do you start with creating a character, or do you start with a pre-gen that gets them right directly into the game, and then you go from there? And what this box set does, what this starter set does, is it splits that difference. Because you can create the character very quickly and modularly with the cards and the little playboard. So you're not spending 2 hours creating the character. And I don't know if this is how you can do it, but maybe you can skip a few parts even, where you can say, here's your character. Don't worry about spells yet. Don't worry about equipment yet. Don't worry about this yet. Just let's start with your background. Put that down. Okay, now let's do this. All right, now you can put your class or whatever, put your equipment on. All right, now let's talk about role-playing with the merchant who you're buying your armor and your swords and stuff from. Okay, those go on the board here. And you can do more that way and keep the attention, I think, longer while shortening that character creation time.
That's the video game tutorial way of doing it. Mm-hmm. As soon as combat starts, then the sword appears in your inventory. If they don't like the sword that appeared in inventory, they see themselves as mere battle axe wielder. And look at the battle axe that appears on the goblin.
Yeah, that's often the approach that I take, is like, here's the character sheet. Don't worry about it. I will introduce you to the boxes on it as they become relevant for you to know about that part of the character sheet. The other concern that I've heard, and maybe we've talked about this already, I think we talked a little bit last week about it, Shawn, is the ease in which this will flip people over to using something like D&D Beyond or a more standard character sheet, because I assume these character sheets, the card system doesn't go all the way to level 20. How easy do you think that flip is going to be for players?
That's one thing I don't know. I have not seen the actual box with all the components, and I've only had a brief look at some of the adventure content. So I can't say that it will be easy. I can't say that it will be great. I will know more in a few hours, hopefully, when I get access to the whole box.
Very well. Well, we look forward to grilling you on that next week. Speaking of an ungodly amount of components for your tabletop RPG, this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast is sponsored by Dante and Arkenforge, who Dante is part of. Arkenforge, if you don't know, they are a map building software, and they are doing a new Kickstarter, which is called the Dark Fantasy Construction Kit. Ready-made digital maps with dynamic lighting, line-of-sight barriers, immersive animations, and I've used Arkenforge quite a bit in the past, and all of these features are fantastic for just putting you in the game. And those all are set up and can be used directly in Foundry, Roll20, or Fantasy Grounds, if you prefer to use those as your VTT of choice. They include both encounter and regional maps. There are thousands of digital assets to build out your Dark Fantasy maps if you want to build the map for yourself. And if you are a physical gamer who prefers to play in person, these maps can be printed out as well if you want to design something really detailed and interesting. Print it out, use it on a monitor that you've got at home, any of those sort of things. We've got monster tokens, gothic PC portraits to play out your desperate battles in Dark Fantasy worlds, and also mood images, which I'm a huge fan of when playing online, especially in role-playing scenes, which are animated scenes from a first-person perspective that kind of just like give you a mood. You see Castle Ravenloft in the distance, and this is literally what you see, and kind of just having a bit of a soundscape and a bit of animated atmosphere there on screen for everybody to engage with, to kind of keep their focus and not flipping across to Instagram or TikTok or wherever else they may go. Has anybody else had a look at the Kickstarter page? This is very dark fantasy themed, so it's obviously up my alley.
I mean, it's gorgeous. Arkenforge, I see them at conventions all the time. And I saw FanCon when I saw them last. From the first time we saw it, when we were doing Ethereal with fan stuff at Dax Odds. I mean, it blew my mind then. It blows my mind now. If I could have that level of like easy on my gaming table at home, I would do it in a heartbeat.
I like these asset packs that are in the thing, the Kickstarter.
Yeah, I can spend hours building maps when I get into like asset packs when they've got lots of different, like the lighting, the moving animations of the flames that you can do in Arkenforge all look really, really fantastic. And you can also use them to build. I talked about this in a Ghostfire video we did recently about puzzles. You can use the assets and the dynamic lighting to create puzzles where, okay, this component, casts light in a certain way, or different things can light up or shut down, and the players have to light the candles in a specific order or something. You can make these really tactile, like visual or even physical kind of puzzles using the toolkit, which is really fantastic. Whether you're playing in Grim Hollow, Ravenloft, and you need your dark fantasy assets, a lot of the stretch goals will also be tied to different types of horror, whether it's gothic horror, eldritch horror, different things like that. The Kickstarter is currently live. I've posted a link to it in the Twitch chat if you're listening to it on Twitch, or if you're on YouTube, the link is that way, pointing the correct direction this week. So go check out Arkenforge's Dark Fantasy Construction Kit. Yeah, go back it now. Also worth mentioning, it's in AUD, so it's a little bit cheaper if you're in the US because of the conversion rate. So
I backed it.
James,
I backed it. It's really reasonable American instead of dollar reduce.
You are hot on it, Shawn. It's only just launched and you're already early backer.
I was probably the 10th backer.
Sure.
Early adopter, Shawn.
Speaking of things that I love, there's not much news this week, so I thought I'd throw it on the run sheet. Witcher Watch, they've released a trailer for the Netflix's season 4 of The Witcher with Liam Hemsworth wearing the white wig and the silver sword. Did anybody else watch this, or is this just a me thing?
No, I didn't watch it.
Oh, okay, I thought... Okay, fair enough.
You are alone in this world.
No, that's fine. It was funny because Dante this morning was like, I look forward to this segment. I'm like, I bet you none of them are going to have an opinion on this. Like, this is a me thing only.
What are your opinions then?
Oh, well, thank you for asking, James. Well, my opinion. No, I mean, it looks fine. It looks like the Netflix Witcher series. The only thing that caught me slightly by surprise, but it makes me go, that makes sense, is he just reminds me of Thor because his brother plays Thor in Marvel, and both of them being Australians doing vague fantasy accent just kind of sound like each other.
There was an Oscars Best Actress roundtable I watched once where they were talking about what director was it? It might have been Spike Lee. I don't know who the director was, but they were talking about a particular director directing them in period pieces and saying, "Why are you acting like this is a bad movie? This is a good movie. Act good." And that's a little bit what I think of when
glowing reviews there. I'll be honest, I will probably watch it because curiosity will get the better of me, and I love all things Witcher. So look forward to more news, and that's your Witcher Watch for today.
Witcher Watch, watching the witches.
On to actually important things. We have an email address. Shawn, what is the email address if people want to email this podcast?
It's podcast@ghostfiregaming.com.
Excellent. And Nathaniel has emailed asking about, and I hope I get the thrust of this question, how to differentiate evil gods from similar villains such as demons, devils, and eldritch beings, ancient gods, who, when you start to get to high-level villains like that, all kind of begin to blend together a little bit. Their plots and machinations are kind of similar, and the differences feel merely cosmetic to some capacity. What kind of villain archetypes fit best with evil gods?
The mythology of a realm dictates a lot of this, right? It's sort of epistemological, right? What is a demon lord but an evil god by another name? In DnD, that has a specific meaning, right? They are celestial in the upper planes. Then you are a god of some sort. And for he has, gods like Tharizdun being cast into the abyss for their evil. And so even though they are a god, they're like living in the lower planes. And there are little things like that going on. But to me, it's the kind of minions that they have in a D&D game. the scene. Any archdevil can be like lawful and evil. Any evil god can be lawful and evil. And they can have these sort of goals that I will make the perfect world that will be in my image, and there will be all law and perfect order. And they have celestials with glowing wings, but a dark aspect to them. And they sort of have this authoritarian, militant attitude to them, rather than reeking of brimstone and covered in blood of demons, fresh from the blood war, stuff like that. That sort of implication, the sort of like George Lucas lived in world sort of way of who they are. That's what makes the switch flip.
I wish I had a pen, because I have like 4 things I want to say, and I'm gonna forget some of them. The first and briefest. Oh, thank you so much. Oh no, it keeps. I just can't quite. The first and briefest is probably that I think it's worth remembering that you don't have to necessarily differentiate an evil god from another high-level villain within a campaign, right? Because within your campaign, you've been fighting not high-level villains until you get to a high-level villain. So unless you are running a ton of high-level campaigns back-to-back, your players probably aren't going to notice that they look the same. So don't stress about it. Don't sweat. The other thing that is worth saying is that in a TTRPG or in fantasy settings, what we've come to expect from a god is in this bizarre place in between real world cultural conceptions of godhood and mythological conceptions of godhood. Like it's existing in its own kind of zone. It is influenced by both. So within a mythology, like Greek mythology, you can pick a fight with a god. It's not that different from fighting a huge sorcerer in many ways. Like, I don't know, Sisyphus tricked death and kept him trapped in his attic for several weeks. Heracles, while very strong, fully beat the god of war in a fist fight, stabbed him with a spear. So, it's like in mythology, in many ways, you are just able to fight them. So in that, we're dealing in a different kind of space when we're talking about fantasy and TTRPGs. We're dealing with something that has been heavily influenced by the concept of gods that can't die. And once we get into that zone, I think the important thing, and it's very easy for me to say this as a homebrew heavy DM, is break the rules. Break the rules. You're not building a balanced stat block like you might for like a necromancer. You are making a god. I remember at some point Colville making a video where he talked about how he might run Vecna, and he's like, well, he's the god of secrets, so maybe silence and all these things. So maybe he can make you just forget some of your spells. That's huge. That's wild. And it's not for every table, but that's the kind of sort of level that I would be thinking on if I really wanted to give that impact of you are playing on a different field. This is something else. This is something bigger. What was the 4th thing?
Should have not pointed them out.
I saved it for last. Shawn, say something while I try to remember what the 4th thing was.
Most players don't care the difference between a god and a demon lord. They want to fight bad things and stop bad things from doing bad things to their world, or they want to replace the gods and demons and become them. Unless your players, one, really care about this philosophical difference between the different types of evil high-level beings, it really doesn't matter whether you're running a demon lord, a devil, or an evil god. That's all I have.
Fair enough.
It's good. You're correct. But on the other end of the spectrum, get vague and evocative, baby. Have you ever read or watched, because it was a good adaptation, The Hogfather? Terry Pratchett, Discworld. In The Hogfather, the entire premise is that someone wants to have their equivalent, their fantasy equivalent of Santa Claus assassinated, right? And so the assassin who is hired for the job has to think about, how do you kill something that is made of belief, right? And I think that is exactly the realm that a god would sit in. How do you kill something that is empowered, that is kept alive, that is perpetuated by the belief of the masses? And of course, in The Hogfather, the answer, spoiler alert, but the answer in The Hogfather is that, The assassin finds access to the Tooth Fairy's castle, gets the teeth of all the children who believe in fantasy Santa Claus, and does a spell on the teeth in order to make the children stop believing in Santa Claus. But it's that kind of out of the box thinking that I think it is super within the realm. If you want this to feel like a god, then you have to tackle it from a more sort of conceptual space, I think is a really fun idea to work with. Basically, that's another format of saying break the rules. You can't fight a god the way that you can fight a mortal being. It has to be something else.
Not just any assassin, but Mr. Tiatine.
Of course, yes. It's really good. Please read it.
It's awesome.
I think when, deciding your high-level villains, I can absolutely see how destroy the world, do evil, like they all start to blend together a little bit. I think if you want to differentiate your villains and decide what sort of monster you want your villain to be, whether it's a demon, a god, something like that, is thinking about like the theme and the sort of story that you want to tell with your players. And maybe, you could even decide that upon a session 0 or early adventures in your campaign, when they're lower level, learn a little bit more about the characters. And if you're fighting a vampire, what are the themes that you're trying to explore through vampirism? Is it hunger? Is it control? Is it desperation, of not having access to blood? Is it guilt and self-loathing that vampires are often portrayed with, whereas demons, on the other hand, are kind of portrayed in a much more kind of like, I don't want to say carefree way, but like do evil, be bad, tends to be the demon way of doing things. But if you're trying to differentiate a demon and a devil and you're thinking like lawful versus chaos, again, think like, to me, demons represent the fallibility of humanity, like all our sins kind of concentrated into physical form, if we think Warhammer 40K for a moment. And so a demon represents chaotic human emotions like wrath, and rage and ruin and the joy of like breaking something, cruelty for the sake of itself. Whereas if you're representing a demon, maybe this is more of a thematically based around like entrapment and blackmail, and kind of emotional manipulation, gaslighting, I can imagine devils kind of doing. And so it's about like choosing a theme and then choosing a monster that maybe embodies that theme in a certain way.
The power of metaphors.
Yeah, totally.
Lean into the metaphors.
And like, depending on how engaged your players are in your campaign will depend on whether this actually, they spot a difference, between these things. But at the same time, it's got to be fun for you as the GM as well. So even if they don't notice the difference, you can kind of be like, well, I liked this. I thought this was neat. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's a tricky thing that happens with TTRPGs, right? Where we can do all the world building we want, and we can build a mythology and a pantheon of gods that feel within the setting very real and grounded and actual. But our players are still coming into that world without any prior knowledge of it. So it's never going to feel the same. Like in the real world, at least in the West, right? The West is culturally Christian, even if it is not religiously Christian. And so we are baked in this understanding of things where, if you were told you have to go fight Jesus, that means something. You're like, Jesus? The Jesus guy, that guy that we're always, the guy who famously came back from the dead. We're fighting that guy. You know what I mean? Like you know some things about it. Whereas your players being told, oh, now you have to fight the old god, Heshkapalakapal. And they're like, I don't know who that is. So it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have an emotional weight to it, which I think is always going to be tricky. And I don't know if there's a really easy way of sort of pushing back against that. But if you are playing something like D&D, honestly, being able to access a being's name that comes up a lot, like how there are spells named after a wizard. If you're told you have to go and fight Mordenkainen, and you've had all these spells that have Mordenkainen's name in the name of the spell you've been casting, that's going to make you feel much more like than just being told a made-up name that you've never heard.
Why do you think there are demon lords named Baphomet and evil gods named Baal and Beelzebub and Moloch? I mean, it's like those are literal Christian demons or, Mesopotamian demons. Tiamat, Bahamut, like D&D is a cultural mythology grab bag for a reason, because those cultural preconceptions make it really easy to insert yourself into the secondary world. We fantasy writers get in a twist about it because it's not pure secondary world. Tolkien hated that C.S. Lewis put Father Christmas in the Narnia books because it's not a pure secondary world. But Father Christmas in Narnia, some guy in a sled giving out gifts, were instead, someone else, Hatapu, then it would not have any sort of cultural resonance.
There's a reason one of the best loved and best selling first edition books was Deities and Demigods, right? Mm-hmm. Because they put all of the most famous real world pantheons and concepts into that book, and people I can fight Thor, let's do this.
It speaks to the power of IP, right? One of the reasons the Star Wars role-playing game, or the Witcher role-playing game for that matter, is fun, is because you can say a group of stormtroopers show up, and chances are your players will know what you're talking about and what that means. If Darth Vader shows up,
you have to fight Darth Vader now.
I've always wanted to do a campaign set, and there's probably a role playing game for this, but set in Greek mythology, for the simple fact of that shared knowledge of what that means. You can just be you hear the sky above you rumble. And everybody goes, uh-oh, did we piss Zeus off? Do we need to be careful in terms of what we're doing? And that sort of cultural cachet is, it's like you said, Dael, it's a challenge for DMs when you're trying to create your own setting, but it is something that you can use to try to, capitalize on players' knowledge.
This is a minor beef of mine here. There are several adaptations of Greek mythology into D&D. Odyssey of the Dragon Lords, Mythic Odyssey of the Theros. A lot of things with Odyssey in the name. But there is, as far as I know,
he was one guy.
There has never been an adaptation of a particular. Greek myth is very expansive and diffuse, right? But there has never been an adaptation of literal Greek myth. It's always kind of taken off in some sort of fantasticized direction into Theros, which is Greek-ish, but distinct.
Hey, that's exactly why I didn't run a campaign in Theros, is because I opened that book and I was like, Google Bloth, the god of war. I don't know that's not Ares. That's not Athena. Right. I want Ares and Athena, so.
Yeah. This head was to say that the thing that Theros did really well in Magic the Gathering, I don't think it successfully did it in D&D necessarily, but in Magic the Gathering, Theros was very successful in a lot of ways in terms of the way it adapted the gods, but specifically the story of their sort of Dionysian analog, and him having to, the whole first arc of that Magic the Gathering block was him traveling around and gathering followers and having to be hey, I'm a new god, but it was all in a bid to gain ascension. And of course, the end of that whole thing is you have to ascend in order to kill the god because he's already ascended. It's a whole thing. Anyway, it was really good. I think they did a great job there. This head was, I remembered a time that I actually experienced that thing working that I was just talking about that was so hard to achieve, was in Dusk, 4E game. Matt Culver was the DM. I had renamed all of my 4E abilities to have, instead of being named after these gods that I knew nothing about, Matt was just well, why don't you rename them? Why don't you make them elven heroes? And so I did. I went off and I did a bunch of my nerdy research, and I, based it on various sort of Welsh myths, and made up my own gods. Gwynagad, the Summer King, all these things. And my daily power was called Flames of Aelian because it was Aelian, the Burner Prince, and this whole thing. And then when I got trapped alone in Equinox, I met a figure, and it was introduced slow, there are these angels of fire that are just like the one that you summon all the time. And I met Aelian, and it felt that thing. And Aelian was just a demigod, but it felt this is a big deal. But it was because I named that guy, and then he came up in the game. So that is a time that it has been successful. So it might be difficult, but it is achievable.
We'll say this sort of thing only works if the players want it to. Right? If the players care about this stuff, they'll care about it. You can't force it. So if you've got a player like Dael who is cool and excitable enough to make up a bunch of elven hero names for their, for like the flavor text of their spells, which rocks my world, few people will do that, but those are the people that you want to court for that kind of idea.
Well, I've had the same thing happen in my campaign, particularly with warlock patrons, where two characters were having a disagreement, and the patron got involved and showed up, and the 4 other players at the table were just like, well, "Who's this guy?" But the player whose patron it was like, "Oh no, yeah," like the kind of clench fear. And I don't know, like, I don't want people to walk away, I think, from this conversation with the lesson of like, well, you have to use your warlock patron as the villain, or you have to use your paladin's father as the villain, or whatever it is. You don't have to do those things. But I think letting the players kind of add to the world helps, like, legitimately add to the world. I've trained at this monastery. They're up here in the mountains, and you're like, okay, cool. That's something I'm going to put a pin in and try to pull back in later. My parents went missing and I don't know where they are. Okay, cool. Let's put a pin in that and I'll try to bring that later. And you don't have to bring them all in, like, because that can become a real bundle of threads that you're trying to kind of pull together. But using the players' kind of buy into the world can create that sort of feeling of like, oh, I know who this is. I know why this is important that this name has been dropped. It's the critical role when Matt just casually drops the Briarwood name.
Oh, it's such a good moment.
Yeah. This email is from Schmern once again, because I had a question. I've been meaning to ask my D&D friends about this, and I thought no better avenue than right now. And this conversation,
we're your D&D friends,
exactly, reminded me of that, which is how much should you help your players as the game master? So what I mean by that is, like, they're trying to think of a solution to a problem. You have kind of created a solution to the problem in the way that you've planned the session, right? And they're like, oh, we could do A and B, but they're not sold on those ideas. And you know that C would be something that would occur to their characters, but the players haven't thought of it. Should you as the GM say, hey, you could do C, or is that starting to pilot them through the game a little bit, and it's better to just let them have those things occur to themselves naturally? Does that make sense?
It does. I completely understand what you're talking about. And I probably flip-flop on this a little bit, but I'm such a big fan of sharing information and everyone's brain getting to be everyone's brain. I, where I can, would probably do it just like in a note pass so that they can be the one to voice it rather than it coming from the DM. Because I think coming from the DM, it gives it an authority.
This is what you should do.
Right? And, it's things like, I mean, this is the reverse, but there's a moment in the most recent episode of The Delian Tomb where I realized my character had been captured, spoiler alert, and I realized, oh, I have a bunch of magic items on me. And the DM hadn't realized. And so I passed the little note to James and Tricasso, and I was like, you probably will have wanted to, like, the goblins would have remembered to steal my stuff.
Sure.
So, but I think that it works in the other direction too, in my opinion.
If time isn't an issue, if they're just debating, this is a piece of Colville advice that I actually agree with surprisingly strongly, because I didn't used to. It's that debating is a part of the game.
Sure.
I used to think that only like forward plot motion was a part of the game, because that's the stuff that, if you're reading a book, that's what's interesting, or watching a TV show, or even watching actual play, I think, of people debating what to do in circles for an hour or more sometimes is not good television. It can be, not always, but it can be telling gameplay.
Yeah, it does. It does come down to the players, the situation in so many ways, because this is a game and this is a storytelling machine that we're using. If the players are more gamist and they're treating it more like a game, and there's information that their character would know that I don't tell them, and they do not do as well in the game as they would otherwise, they are going to be very upset if I did not pass this information along. Now, if I know that there's a better story to be had by holding back this information, then I am definitely not going to give that information, because I know that down the road they will appreciate the better story for it. But then again, I have to know the player and know that they are going to appreciate this tangent that we went off on because they may not have had all the information that their characters would have. There's no right answer. It's just a matter of, what do your players want? What do you want? And in the long run, what gets you to that goal? Not necessarily the quickest, although in some cases, as James said, the quickest is the most important thing. What gets you to the final state that's best, and then follow that path.
This kind of tactical debate can, for some groups, be most of their role playing as well. So I do think it's something that is worth not interrupting. But even I've had DMs who send little notes, whisper notes that are adjacent to the thing you want them to think of. Just little things that will prompt you to remember the extra, just 1 or 2 steps removed from where you want them to get. Or even sometimes, as Shawn is saying, if it makes a better story, sometimes they'll do little conflicting things to different people just to keep that debate going, because that's the more interesting story right now, or to make the wrong choice happen, or, any number of things. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer, Schmenschman. But
the thing that made me think of it was that recently we had a situation where the players it wasn't that they were debating which solution was best. It was more that they felt like they just didn't know. They were like, I'm not sure what we should do. And I was going to suggest to one of them, I was like, well, your patron might know something about this, but I didn't know whether to bring that up. Because of what you said before, Dael, that might, coming from the DM, does that seem like the course of action they should take, or the course of action that I quote unquote planned for them to take, which it wasn't, but I didn't want that to be the read of the situation.
I reckon that's when you do the cheesy as hell. Like if your patron has like a symbol, like, oh, hey, so and so who plays the warlock, you notice a crow alight on a nearby branch and call into the sky. That sort of thing where it's like, hey, remember how you have a patron? Hey.
Yeah, gotcha.
What I'm about to say is basically exactly what Dael was saying, with a slightly different flavor on it. It's like in a TV show, you wanted to subtly remind the audience of the concept. You would maybe have the patron appear at the start of the episode, which you can't do in the sort of medium. You would have the patron appear and talk about something unrelated to make sure the audience remembers, oh, right, there's an important character that has this other patron that has incredible powers. And so if something like that is happening in the moment, you could interject the patron's tangential aside, but the patron requesting some, frivolous task, like, Warlock, you've ignored me for so long. Will you please not give me the vial of a black dragon? And then it's like, oh, right, I've got a patron. Oh, right, I've got a very powerful patron who wants me to do things in exchange for favors. Hey, wait a minute, I could reverse that relationship right now.
There's an old bit of DM advice, which is, don't come up with any solutions. Let your players
that's exactly it.
With the solution. And obviously, like any old advice, it's true to a point. Sure. And there are times when there is one solution and it needs to be done. But as much as you can, let the players get themselves into trouble. Let the players do their thing. They will have more fun generally, as long as it's not a punitive, well, you didn't do what I thought, so now you go off in this direction. I'm going to show you. That doesn't mean no consequences, but it doesn't have to mean, dire consequences.
And as Pat has said in chat, and I love this advice, because sometimes I feel like as DMs, we get caught up in trying to be psychics who can always read our players. But Pat in chat says, even just ask the room, hey, are you guys enjoying this conversation, or would you like a suggestion of help to move on?
Yeah. Well, I hope that helped you out, Schmern. This one coming in from DJ, asking about breaking in as a freelancer. And in fact, we also got a question from John that was kind of similar about pitching TTRPG projects. DJ has been contributing to a tabletop RPG magazine. So has done a little bit of freelance work, but is seeking advice on continuing to seek freelance opportunities. They don't have any grand designs of working full-time in the industry or anything like that, but would love to have their credit in the name of a hardcover one day or something like that. So just looking for how to access more opportunities. And this kind of ties in a little bit with John's similar question, which is that John has been generating a lot of TTRPG content on their own, but doesn't know when it is complete enough to be able to pitch this either to a publisher or fellow collaborators. How do you know when a TTRPG project is finished? Or how do you turn unfinished work, unpublished work into something that looks more professional as a portfolio or a body of work? As our expert panels of freelancers and TTRPG writers.
And also Dael.
Taking the two together, there's the tiniest bit of overlap that I could find. I've said it so many times, and I feel bad saying it again because it's tough to hear, but ideas don't mean anything. Ideas are a dime a dozen, and that doesn't mean your ideas aren't good. That doesn't mean your ideas aren't necessarily unique, but unless you are able to complete them to fruition, they are just ideas. So whether you are trying to find other people to work with you, whether you are trying to get the attention of a company to publish your stuff as a project or just as a freelancer, have something complete to give them. Now, complete can be a spell. Complete could be a monster. Complete could be a magic item. But the people that you are trying to pitch your idea to come on board to work with you, to hire you to work for them, have to see that you can finish something. And so that's, for me, the most important thing here. If you can finish something, then you have something to give them, and then they can look at the work and start to make decisions or give you feedback to help you improve if improvement is what you're looking for. And we should all be looking for improvement.
Broadly, a pitch tells you little, not nothing, but very little of someone's ability to execute upon it, which is why late in my tenure of N-World's 5e magazine, while I was editing it, I started asking for writing samples in addition to pitches. What happens now these days is a publisher has an idea and they look for people who they know they can execute, and they say, here's a brief, please write this back. And so the way you want to get hired is by creating those things that you have an idea of yourself, publishing them on some platform of yours, a blog, a YouTube channel is how a lot of people get their ideas in the water these days. Social media is a mess. Twitter is worthless for this, unfortunately, now. YouTube or a blog of your own, weirdly enough, I think are the best ones to go for right now. Get those out there, make a portfolio, and then, as Shawn said, start trying to gather the attention of people who want stuff published. Go to cons, go to the Ghostfire booth, give them your card. Go to a smaller con like Big Bad Con where it's all creators giving each other their cards. I've hired people out of Big Bad Con for projects, for Ghostfire projects, for personal projects, for other stuff.
Yeah, when you say, because I agree with you, I've asked for writing samples before as well, rather than somebody just kind of saying like, hey, I'm keen to work, because what I need to see is not just their capacity to complete a project, but also their capacity to write in the style that I need for this specific project. Something that I learned a lot with like visual artists is that art is creative, it's expressive, it's all these things, and different people learn different skills and have different styles. So you can't just go to an artist and say, I want gothic horror, if they're like an anime artist, and expect them to be able to like give you exactly what you're after, right? Because that's not their style, it's not their skill set, and it's not how they like to express themselves. And I was like, oh, that's the same with writing. Some writers, they might be very talented as writers in a specific style, but their influences are different. What they're passionate about is different. And so their ability to turn out the specificities of what you want are going to be different, and that's fine. It just means different folks might be right for different projects depending on like what the project is that you're working on. So sometimes when I'm looking for writers, it's not just about can you write well, but can you write in the style that I need you to write in? Am I buying this, or does this feel a little bit like you're outside your wheelhouse, or you don't really get what we're aiming for here, right? What can you or should you submit as a writing sample? Shawn mentioned, something that's finished could be as short as a spell. And I've definitely gotten writing samples that are just far too long. And I look at it and I'm like, I'm a busy dude. Like I do not have time to read through this and check whether it's, good or not. And even just getting an overly long writing sample can just be a bit like, skip, next one, because even if you can say, well, I don't have to read the whole thing, it's like, well, I'd rather just be able to get through the ones that look digestible to me. And that's just, applying for job advice is, keep it concise, blah, blah, blah. What are your thoughts on that, James?
You know how when you apply for a job, you kind of want to tailor your resume to the company? It's exactly the same for your portfolio. Ideally, if you're serious about getting hired, you will have a writing sample of a lot of different things. You'll show that you can make it, like D&D is kind of king in this world, so D&D is a great place to start. Show that you can do a monster, show that you can do a spell, show that you can do an encounter, show that you can do a short dungeon with rooms that are keyed to a map.
Show that you can do a riddle, a puzzle, a little group of goblins, and a dragon.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And so if you're pitching to Dael, those are the things you got to prove that you can do. And the only way you learn that is by watching Dael's videos. The only way you learn that is by reading the books that Wizards of the Coast publishes, or Dungeon Press, or Ghostfire, or Kobold Press, or MCDM, or whoever. Because companies only want to publish the things that they're known for publishing most of the time. They have an audience, they have a brand, people want more of what they get, often with only minor variations. And, big variations happen over time. And so, do research and then have a lot of things ready to go.
And understand the format of the game you're writing for. Because while James is absolutely correct, and Brad, you are as well, in the stylistic thing, there's also a language. There's a correct way to write a spell for 5th edition 2024 D&D. There's a correct way to format and write a monster. And if you can show, despite flavor, despite the wibbly wobbly thingies, theme stuff, I just want to know that you can write clearly, especially if you're writing rules or even if you're writing adventure text. I need to see that you can, as I always say, rub a noun and a verb together and start a fire. Right. You can do these things and people will understand what it is that you're saying.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely on that, Shawn, because I've gotten writing samples or worked with freelancers before and looked at their work and been like, oh, you don't know how to write in the D&D style. You don't know how to lay out how to make an ability check. There's specific language which you can self-teach through the SRD. You're allowed to just copy and paste what's in there and kind of adjust the stuff around. And that's a huge barrier as like a lead writer or somebody who's managing an editor is going like, I'm going to have to invest time in teaching you how to write in the core 5e style before we can even start to look at whether these spells are balanced or this monster is interesting or whatever. And so having that in your tool belt already is very important for the specific game that you're writing for.
It is much easier to teach technical style than it is to teach someone how to be a good writer. And so I will often work with people whose writing fundamentals are good, but who don't know a style. Like when I go to Big Bad Con and I see people's writing samples and this isn't quite right, but it's within my capability to teach. And I love your prose. So I am going to work with you kind of on a small assignment to see if you are willing and eager to learn. Because I'm not going to waste time teaching someone who doesn't want to learn. But if someone does show aptitude at being a quick study, then it's well, that stuff's easy. We have style guides for a reason. Really good writers can pick up a style guide real quick. I never want to teach someone how to write the fundamentals. I never want to teach a writing 101 class because I don't know how to teach that. Some people do, but I'm not one of them. But TTRPG basics are weird and technical enough because this is technical writing in addition to good prose. Right? It's like a computer manual in addition to everything else. It just also has to be fun to read. What a nasty piece of work. A computer manual that's fun to read. Why do we do this to ourselves?
4 words. Chicago Manual of Style.
Boom.
Buy it, live it, learn it, love it. Use it to prop up the short end of your couch. But, It's
multi-purpose.
I've got 3 different editions in my closet right here that I could pull out and show. So yes, very important if you want to be a writer of any sort to get the proper documentation. And for most TTRPG companies, it's the Chicago Manual of Style.
History Prof in chat says that the new edition of the Chicago Manual just came out. So the time is hot.
I will now have 4 copies then.
Forget the starter adventure for D&D. The real exciting release date is here.
Yeah, are there going to be Chicago edition wars, perhaps?
you joke, but
speaking of edition wars, there are going to be edition wars between this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast and next week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast in terms of what people prefer. But they're all good, so you should just listen every week because we are here 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific on a Monday. That is 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Time on a Tuesday. Those times, as we talked about this morning, will be changing in the next few weeks, possibly. I'm not sure which times will be changing yet, but just because of daylight savings adjustments. Whenever we enter October, November, things get a little bit squirrely. But we will always be up same time, which is I think about 10 a.m. Tuesday. American Eastern Time. That's when the podcast version goes up. Go listen to it. We're on Spotify. We're on YouTube. We like thumbs and stars and stuff and lots of things. I've been Ben Byrne here with Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, James Hake, and we will be back next week for another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast.
Ba-ba-da-ba?
There we go.
Ba as an adjective, ba as a verb, ba as a noun.
Ooh.
There you go. There you go.
Ask not for who the ba does. Hello, podcast.